All right, Leviticus 10. Let's just call this one Aaron, because we've talked enough about the tragedy that has come upon his boys, but for some reason, Aaron stood out to me as the perspective that I kind of wanted to look at chapter 10 from this time. And it's because it really struck me as a difficult task to pick up so soon after coming off the high of being anointed, having God give you the endorsement, and then have to pick up the pieces after losing two sons. More importantly, the way in which he was called to grieve really called him to grieve in silence and not do what can be, I guess, considered the traditional grieving that I got a better look at when I got the chance to visit and go to funerals overseas, and to see how a greater demonstration of grief you can see at some funerals. None of that was supposed to go on here. And it reminded me also of Ezekiel, except Ezekiel, when he lost his wife, it wasn't because of any wrong that she had done. It was simply God, in many ways, making the man's life an object lesson and his wife's life an object lesson for the things that were ahead for Israel. And so he wasn't told to keep silent because this was the judgment of the Lord. He was told to keep silent because he was representing the way that Israel would really have no time to actually mourn the things that were going to happen to them. And so ultimately, when I'm looking at the grief that Aaron's having to deal with and the grief that Ezekiel's having to deal with, it reminded me of Psalm 39, where it reads, I said, I will guard my ways that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth with a muzzle so long as the wicked are in my presence. I was mute and silent. I held my peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me, and I mused. The fire burned, and then I spoke with my tongue. He's going to go on to talk about the things that he did say, but the thing that I want to emphasize is when life gets heavy and we're having to deal with grief, we're dealing with an enemy that finds joy in our grief, but he also finds joy in compounding our misery by watching us respond out of our pain in ways that just make it worse. And so my encouragement to each and every one of us is when life gets heavy, to please understand that we're not the only ones. And if these stories are going to be anything more than stories, my hope is that they help us deal with our heavy moments, whether or not they relate to the death of a loved one or just moments when it seems like life is piling on wave after wave, like we're at the beach, but we're not dealing with water. We're dealing with wave after wave of difficulty and provocation or pain. Ask God to help us do what James has counseled us to do, is to try to learn to tame the tongue. The encouragement is, he says, if anybody can tame the tongue, they're a perfect person. And so who among us is perfect? But it's one of those things that helps remind us that we have a common struggle and a common need, not only to be diligent to ask God to help us understand what to say at the right moment, especially when we're under stress, but to pray for others who we see struggling so that the devil, the enemy, doesn't get a compound joy out of our misery and the ways that we can have to also recover from the things we regret saying in times when we're being provoked. God's best to you as you go forward in him, though.